All right, using a very simple cantus firmus, I'm going to pretend very quickly that this is not a bass clef, but a treble clef, to give you an idea of how this is going to look on your homework. So sorry about the slight offsetedness of that. So a super duper typical cantus firmus. Let me label this, put together as a CF, nice and simple. For this cantus firmus, let's do this in F major. That's a very comfy key. So here is my cantus firmus. When I'm creating my counterpoint, this is in first species, which means I have a whole note against a whole note. So I already know that I need to start and end on the same pitch. It's okay if that's a unison or it's an octave. I would encourage you to only think about it as an octave, because if you put something as a unison, you have the possibility of voice crossing. And voice crossing in counterpoint is also something that we are going to want to avoid. So I'm going to start with an F and I'm going to end with an F at the octave. I'm also going to make sure I go from T to Do in my second to last voice, because remember, T is going to resolve up to Do. The leading tone is going to resolve up to Do no matter what we're doing, as long as it's something from this century, this time period. But that's just a good rule to always remember. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is keep an eye on where my intervals that I have to put in have started. Now this works out beautifully because I already have my octaves on the outside, so I should only have one perfect interval at the most between my voices on the inside, between these two edges in my counterpoint, and I already have that sixth. And remember, I want to primarily move in sixths and thirds if I can. So since I'm going to be coming to this E, I have to make my way there, and I want to get there as smoothly as I possibly can, I'm going to actually work backwards. Remember, this is like solving a puzzle rather than writing music. Don't mind the motorcyclist outside my apartment. So the next thing I have is an A. Now, if I wanted to, having somewhat of smooth motion, I could come from a C. That's a little bit of a leap, but it's only of a leap of a third, so that's not really all that bad. So I'm going to try having this be a third and see where I go. Now, I've already written myself into a box by doing that. Because if I want to maintain the idea of a third, I could come down here. However, that B flat is starting to get into the territory of the range of my cantus firmus, so I really don't want to do that particular B. I'm going to want to do a sixth above, which means I would have another leap. And I really, really, really don't want to do that. So I think in order to maintain space between these two voices, to have as much space as possible, I'm going to see if I can make this note the distance of a sixth from my A in the bass and not the distance of a third. So where does that put me? That puts me at an F. So I have motion going from Do to T to Do. I have similar motion, so going in the same, actually no, it's parallel motion. I have parallel motion going from, whoa, can I make that smaller? That is a big eraser. Oh, no wonder I made it super big. Let's not do that. Shoot, get out of here. There we go. So I have Do to D to T, blah, to Do in my counterpoint, and I have Mi, Re, Do in my cantus firmus. So I have parallel motion here, but then I have contrary motion when we get to that second to last chord. And that contrary motion is what I'm after the most if I can help it. So I'm going to go ahead and ignore the parallel motion, and I'm going to stick with this 6 right here. So now I'm going to a G, and let's see. I'm going to keep my pattern of 6s, and I'm just going to have an E here. This is the same as my penultimate interval. Now, when I come to this A, I'm kind of in the same boat again, but actually now I have filled in most of the voices of the second half. I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to meet myself in the middle and see where I'm going from here. So if I start on an F and I come down, this voice is going up. That gives me contrary motion. Whoa. So I'm going to come down to this E again and make a sixth. That's a very, very typical way for a cantus firmus and a counterpoint in first species to interact. But now I've got this B, and this B is ticking me off. When I get to this A here, I probably want to maintain a sixth. So let's see. I've got it. So from my B flat to my F here is a perfect fifth. Now, if you remember from the chapter, it's okay to have one perfect interval on the inside voices, but you really only want to have one. So I've used that up with using my perfect fifth here. And when I go from my A to my F, that is a sixth. So notice how this line is not too terribly interesting. Notice how filling in these voices, unless this is a type of music you're really, really interested in, is a lot more like solving a puzzle as opposed to writing music. So let's go ahead and look at an example. Now I gotta use the really big eraser. In second species, but with this exact same cantus firmus. So remember, in second species counterpoint, it means we have two half notes against one whole note. And I'm going to go against my better judgment here and create bar lines and put myself back into green here, stick with the Christmas theme. So in second species counterpoint, I can put two half notes per every whole note in my cantus firmus. This gives me a little bit more freedom, but it also introduces more problems because now there is a second idea about counterpoint that I can add on. I have more notes to play with, therefore I have more rules to think about. In second species counterpoint, the second half of the measure can be a dissonance. The second half of the measure only can be a dissonance. But that dissonance has to be treated by step, which means if I go from a consonance to a dissonance, I must come back to a consonance because think about it, if I can only have a dissonance on the second half of the measure, once I get to the next first part of the next measure, that has to be a consonance. So I am thinking only in stepwise motion if I decide to use a dissonance. If I want, I can also have a whole note at the very end. So I'm going to keep my F in my final voice there. And remember, this was a performance practice. This was a compositional practice. This is us putting language to what composers have already done, which is why these rules might feel a little bit arbitrary. So I know, again, that I would like to start, or I'm going to have to start, with an F, an octave's distance from my opening, just like I have to have that F an octave's distance or on the same pitch at the end. I would like to keep it at the same pitch because this cantus firmus tends to be going above the note that it starts and ends on, which means if I were to put something right here, we would have a whole lot of the exact same motion. Things would be coming from above. If this cantus firmus went above and below my tonic pitch, I would have a little bit more freedom as to where things were going, but it's not doing that. So I'm going to keep my voice a little bit higher in my counterpoint to make sure that I don't overlap anything in the cantus firmus. So if I were to go from an F to an E, that is stepwise motion. And then when I get to my G in the cantus firmus, in my counterpoint, what if I stay on that E? That's not bad. That gives me a sixth. So then from there, I'm going to, let's see, what do I want to do? That kind of writes me a little bit into a box too. I have a better idea. Another one of these rules that exists in this type of counterpoint is if I would like, I can have a rest at the beginning of the first measure, just in case I run into something that I might box myself out of. So the first note of my counterpoint can be on the second half of my first measure. It still follows the same rules, although technically also in this counterpoint, you can have your first voice be a fifth above instead of an octave above. But I only want you to be thinking in octaves so that you don't have too many rules bombarding your brain, which means when I come down here, I'm going to give myself that sixth. So from here to here is the 8. Here's a 6. Let's see. What do I want to do from there? Ooh, I've got it. Do I got it? Because I was thinking I can move things around a little bit. And if I land on a D here, that actually gives me a third. So I think what I'm going to do is go to a fifth. So that gives me a perfect fifth between the G and the D. And I've already used up the one time. In second species, you can kind of fudge around and go to 2 times with the perfect interval. But again, that's getting into specificity I don't want you to worry about. But this creates smooth voice leading for me. I'm going down in this voice. I'm going up in this voice. I've got general, words. Contrary motion. Whew. I've got general contrary motion happening, which is kind of what we want to always have and can help it in counterpoint. So now I'm going to a 3. I'm going to go ahead and go to a fourth. And remember, in this type of music, a fourth was actually considered a dissonance. So if it's on the second half of the measure, I'm okay. And then I'm going to come back up to my F here. Remember, I have a dissonant interval. And to them, a perfect fourth was a dissonant interval. And so I have stepped to it, and I am stepping away from it. It must be approached and left by step. So now I've gotten to this A. I am a sixth above. I've put myself in a bit of a situation here, too, because I've kind of got to do the same thing that I did over here. Who wrote this cantus firmus? You and I need to have words. If I really want, no, I don't like that either. I was thinking if I were to go up, but then I'd create another octave, and I would have to be moving down here when the cantus firmus is also moving down, and I want to have contrary motion as much as I possibly can. So I'm going to go to another, whoopsies. I'm going to go to another fifth. That's my second one. I really shouldn't have another one if I can help it. And then I've got oblique motion again. If I keep that E in my counterpoint, because that gives me a 6 against this G. So now I think I want to have a, oh no, I can't do that. Dag nabbit. See what I mean about how it's solving puzzles? Let's see. So I'm going 6, 7. That's a dissonant interval, but as long as I approach and leave it by step, but then I would really have to put a G right here. You know what? I think I've just kind of written myself in a box. I'm getting out of here. Now I have to approach and leave that by step 2. It's kind of a choice between evils at this point. So if that is 6, I'm gonna try my other instinct and see if that works. So I'm gonna go from a 6 to a 7. No, because I really should approach and leave that by step 2. I wonder if I have to go back even further. Maybe this thing should operate in thirds. Because if I go from here and I go down instead, so I create a second and then stay on, no, because then I'm not, how are you supposed to get away from that without, maybe I should just do a leap here in the beginning. Suppose I could go in the other direction, couldn't I? So what if I do this instead? And this is a 7, which is coming up here, which is now a 6th, going to a 5, which can go to another 6. Yeah, let's try that. Okay. And then here, not a dissonant interval because the 5th is not dissonant. You just shouldn't use perfect intervals too much if you can help it. So this is going 6, 6, 5, 5. I think that will work. And have that A would be an F. So, I mean, technically I could use a dirty trick to write myself out of here because there is a rule that you can jump a fourth. You can jump the distance of a fourth if you resolve in the opposite direction. Because if I go from a 6 to a third, kitty, go away. Mommy's working. Go on. If I go to a 6 to a third, then I can actually create another third here, which helps me a great deal because now I have a string of thirds that are happening. So let's do this, and then that gives me a fourth, but it's on an offbeat. And then I'm going to do this. And one of the tricks is you can have the penultimate chord also be a whole note. So it's not the prettiest counterpoint, but technically this works. So technically that would be correct. You see what I mean about like fitting everything within that particular set of rules? It's a really funky kind of way of writing, but this was all about making sure that your music fit within this particular puzzle space. And if you were a musician at this time period, you could look at a cantus firmus and you could immediately see these things because that's essentially the only type of music that you had to worry about or were exposed to. Shoot, I should not do these after 6. Excuse me. But this is a way for you to think about it, and this motion is relatively stable. Let me give myself an F so I can see what the heck I'm doing. Actually, I'm just going to pull up my little piano app. This is going to be entertaining. So I want to see what it sounds like, and of course I'm getting an ad on my piano app when I'm in the middle of pseudo teaching. So if I've got no, that's right. So that's what it sounds like. Again, not the best counterpoint, but something to give you an idea. The thing that's important is going through and looking at the rules, looking at the motion between voices, and seeing how you are writing yourself into or out of corners. I would go through and do this process out loud, do it with a friend so that you can compare notes. It's all about how to best solve the puzzle. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. If not, happy counterpointing. Let's go with that. Happy counterpointing.